Hey guys, it's been 14 months since World Time Attack 2019, and as you can probably tell, it's been a bit quiet on the RX7 Derek front. That's because I haven't had the car for the last 14 months. As you may recall, the last lap of World Time Attack 2019, we suffered a gearbox failure. At the time, I was considering gearbox options, so I left the car over here at RaceOnly Sydney. Now, as I'm sure everyone has come across, this year we had COVID-19, which resulted in the border being closed between Vic and New South Wales, which meant that I couldn't actually pick it up even though the car's been ready for about 4 months. But as of Monday, that border's been open again. So here we are.
Every morning, 2-3 times.
You'll always want it.
Cold start.
Thank you, sir.
Hey, Omar.
Anthony, how's it going?
So the car's been here for a while. I guess I haven't touched it at all. So maybe Omar, if you can talk about a little bit about what we've been up to in the past 14 months.
It's been a little while. I'm going to have to recollect a little. What did you do first? Gearbox?
Gearbox, yeah.
Gearbox. So Gearbox, I think, was the first thing we needed to address because we broke it at World Time Attack. Well, actually, you broke it.
I broke it. He dialed up the power.
Hey,
420 kilowatts on a stock gearbox.
Everything I did, you authorized. I'm pretty sure we did anyways.
The car was going pretty quick.
It was.
That power.
It was going good.
Very, very
and you broke fifth gear, right?
Fifth gear, not even on throttle, just full throttle coming out of turn 5 and just...
Yeah, it literally, yeah. So we didn't obviously try and fix the old gearbox. So we ended up getting another second-hand box. We also rebuilt that gearbox, so we did synchros, bearings, off the top of my head, I think, at least. So just a general freshen up, just so I guess we had started with something that was nice and clean and fresh. So, but the gearbox wasn't the exciting part.
Yeah, I think there was one point where we were looking at other options, Elvin's gear sets, and then we went up to Samsonus and HUTs and all kinds of stuff, and then the price range was just going way back in the side. Look, for now it's just...
Were they applicable in clock sprint?
We can, but they can't be sequential.
Yeah,
for clock sprint, you can run a H pattern.
Yeah,
but it's like you're spending that much money for a H pattern, and then...
Yeah, but like, I mean, you look at the H pattern options that are around that are decent, they're all worth sequential money. Like, I mean, you wouldn't put a 154 Super in a car like this, it had to be something worthy, maybe a CD009 or whatever. But every time we looked at one of those options, it was always sequential territory anyways. So I think this was probably the okay choice considering all things. But and we turned down power as well. Apparently, to look after the gearbox, I reckon it's Raul just being a little afraid.
So we went back to 12 psi springs on the waist grade. We previously had 14 psi. With the 14 psi, the range of power was 300 kilowatts all the way. What was it, 420?
Yes. So we had 300 to 420 kilowatts before. I think we're like 275 or 280 to 370, 380 at the moment. So we've shifted it down maybe 20 or 30 kilowatts, maybe 40 at the peak. And
the benefit of going for a lower power band at the bottom end is I've got gear-based boost control. Yeah. So lower gears run less boost, and even with 300 kilowatts, that's a lot of power to be running in seconds. So this allows us to bring that down more. And also throttle position-based boost control, which means that as you're coming on the throttle, the first sort of 50% of throttle we're running lower boost, and it's only at the last bit that actually winds.
Because you always had issues in second gear, right? I think second gear was always a little taily. Although you thought it was driver error, right? So I don't think that's all we did in the box. I don't think we did anything else. So yeah, we went with a factory rebuilt box. Oh, that's true.
That doesn't really count.
Yeah, but we did
just to monitor it a bit more to see.
Yeah, which you still got to connect.
Still got to wire that up.
Yeah, your wiring is all your department. I'm gonna stay away from that. So then
he doesn't want to touch my butchered loom.
Yeah, we're not opening that can of worms. So I guess the next thing was Accusump. So I guess Accusump was a little challenging on this car, I think, to say the least.
And we put in the Accusump because we had some oil surge.
Yes, actually, we should touch on that. So we had an oil surge under heavy braking. I'm pretty sure it was heavy braking.
Coming out of turn, if I recall, out of turn 3.
Yeah, okay, that sounds right. So under heavy braking, we had oil pressure drop to like, I think, 30 or 40, which was enough to trip the oil pressure safety on the ECU. So
I remember pulling into the pits, yelling at people, "Get me out of limp mode! Get the laptop!"
Yeah.
Very frustrating.
So I guess that's why we went down the Accusump. Actually, we should probably talk about why we didn't choose like going down the route of a different oil pan, because we spoke about that as well, right? So we kind of thought, we looked at all the oil pans that were on offer at the time. I don't think much has changed since we kind of made that decision, and we didn't think that there was anything out there that was
substantially better than stock.
Correct. Yeah. So we kind of agreed the Accusump would cover us, because it's like a fairly small scenario where we're having the surge. It's not
happening regularly. Huge. You're sort of seeing, like, if we actually look at the data, we're talking like in the entire event of World Time Attack, it probably happened twice.
Yeah.
And there's a few rather smaller spikes I saw, but they're really, really transient. You're talking like, a few hundred milliseconds or...
But it's enough, like, as soon as it's enough to trip to safety, though, that's it. That session is done, unless obviously... I think you eventually started turning your car on and off, right?
Yeah, I was literally... Yeah. I'd hit limp mode and literally on the track turn it on and off to reset it.
That was the only way to keep going. Otherwise, you lost the whole session. So, which was frustrating. So I guess moving on to the Accusump, maybe we can show them some. I guess once we get into it. But the first rendition of the Accusump, come have a look and we'll show you. So the first time we did the Accusump install, we tapped off the main feed line coming off the front cover, which goes to the oil coolers.
Might be worth explaining what an Accusump is.
Yeah, okay. I was actually... Sorry, my assumption. I just assume everybody knows what Accusump is.
In my electrical engineering...
Actually, I'll let you explain, because your explanations are excellent.
In my electrical engineering analogy, it's a capacitor. But basically what it does is, it's like imagine a piston with a spring behind it. And when you pressurize the system, that spring compresses and fills up with oil. Then you have a valve that essentially cuts off. So now you've got a pressurized cylinder that has the oil pressure that you're normally running. Then when the oil drops below a certain value, the solenoid opens, and the spring will basically try to discharge it until it equalizes that pressure again. The idea is if you have a very brief, short period of loss of oil pressure, it will basically just inject a bunch of oil in there to bring it back up. And it also helps during pre-oiling, so if your car's been sitting without being turned on for a really long time and the engines drive oil, just turning on the ignition is enough to inject the lines,
primes the bearings. Yeah.
So it's a relatively cheap way of dealing with this stuff without buying a full dry sump kit for $5,000 or whatever it might cost you.
And look, on the topic of cost, I think you have to look at the guys who have spent good money on oil pans and achieved nothing with them anyways. So you have to consider that as well. So lots of the oil pans out there with relatively the same money as Accusump still don't achieve, I guess, the result they're looking for. So I think taking the OEM solution and kind of addressing that specific surge with the Accusump is going to pan out probably to be the best way. But come have a look now that we, I guess, have an idea of an Accusump is. So we picked up off the main feed off the front of the block. So we teed off from here. We sent it up to this solenoid, if you like. So remember, I mentioned there's a solenoid that sits in front of the Accusump. And then we've got the Accusump all the way down here. And that's that canister mounted really closely to the gearbox. I don't know if you guys can see it there, but it's just this blue thing over here. So this is the thing that I guess gets pressurized, gets to hold all the oil. So
it's what, 2 quarts?
It is 2 quarts, yes. So
for those people that use metric, that's pretty much 2 liters.
Yeah, we're just going to say 1.8 for the guys who are with OCD. So yeah, look, it's roughly 2 liters. I guess when we initially installed it, we didn't see any issues with picking up oil from here. We just assumed that there wouldn't be any issues picking up oil from here and feeding it back. So obviously, wherever you pick up the oil from, that's where it feeds it back into. It's a single entry, so same way in, same way out. If that makes sense. So I guess
boy, did we not know what we were getting into.
Yeah. So one of the issues, well, actually, I guess the main issue we had is we kept getting oil out of the relief valve on the Accusump. So the Accusump has this really cool valve, which I think is not so cool, but we'll get into that one later. So basically, whenever the oil pressure gets higher than 175 psi, it literally starts to, I guess, vent. And how much liters of oil did we go through on this car? Just that day.
So we came up in June to pick up the car, and they were just almost finishing up the Accusump at the time. and we were sort of testing it. And it had sort of been tested a few times.
So we tested it, I think, maybe 2 or 3 times. Thought that we had a working solution, I guess, if you like. And
just waiting for a dyno run.
Pretty much. We was waiting to go on the dyno, and
we went through about, what, 10 litres, 12 litres?
No, it was more. I think by the time we were done, maybe 25 litres of oil.
On the floor?
Yes. There was a lot of cleaning up. I think I cleaned up that day maybe 3 or 4 times.
So essentially, I remember you had that pressure relief valve there, and you'd rev the car, and then you'd just discharge. You just straight away. And it came up very quickly, yeah? It was just like there was no oil, and then there was a puddle.
So you basically had 2 litres of oil on the ground within 5 seconds.
Yeah.
And so the strange thing is, I guess the thing that was weird for us is we're looking at the oil pressure on the ECU. And we're measuring in 2 places, by the way, which we'll get to that interesting part in a sec. So we're measuring at the rear plate, and we're measuring at the front plate. And we couldn't see anywhere near that sort of oil pressure.
And when we talk about rear plate, we're talking about the stock port on the series.
Correct. So the OEM port that sits under the oil filter, there's a little port there on an FD motor. That's where we're measuring on the rear
front plate on the turbo feed.
Yes. Yeah. So we couldn't see anything that at the time that would indicate that we were, I guess, breaching that valve, if you like. We were getting closer. Like we were seeing 160 to maybe 165 on the rear sensor, which is very close, but it's not 175.
And you guys might remember a post I did last year where we were sort of looking at oil, and it was just doing weird things. Like with oil, you typically expect that it will be a linear increase and then it will flatten out. What we were sort of seeing was oil would sort of go up and then start dropping off. But at the same time, this oil pressure was really, really, really high. So we were sort of seeing like on a 20W60, which I don't typically use, but when we did run it, we were seeing as much as sometimes like 200 200.
So at the track, we would say 200, definitely
220 psi. Yeah. And then even when I was 10W40, I'd be sitting about 170 psi. That's a lot of oil, and probably credit to the fittings and everything in the oil system that we don't get leaks despite running that much oil through.
No pop hoses, definitely. So at the time, I guess we thought we were just simply too close to the limit of the Accusump. We thought, okay, we're simply making too much oil pressure. So at that time, this engine had a modified oil rig, which meant that we had roughly 1.5 to 1.75, I would say. So instead of having your 90 to 100 psi of oil pressure, we had like 170 to 200, I guess. So we thought it wouldn't be too much of a problem. It'd be an easy fix. We pull down the oil pan, do the oil reg, which is a pretty big job to do on these cars, but we did it anyways.
And we found out why we were getting substantially high. The oil reg had failed.
Yes.
Clogged or whatever.
Yeah. So it was bound. Essentially, it was stuck.
Which explains why we were getting all these problems.
Correct. But that's the thing. So what we did is we ended up going to, I think, our first step from the OEM reg setting, which gives us maybe another 10 or 20 psi of oil pressure. And we put it all back together and still had the same problem. So even though the ECU is now only showing 100 to 110 psi of oil pressure, we still had the Accusump venting like it was seeing 100 or 175 psi of oil pressure. So I think we lost another 10 litres of oil that day. I'd say this is probably well flushed, by the way. So
I'm still convinced that this must be like a tactic. You're on the straight and you want to dump oil.
Yeah,
it must be a feature, because I can't think of any other reason why higher oil pressure situation you want in a motorsport application to dump oil everywhere.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't understand how in any sort of motorsport or anywhere where the car is moving that they want oil to go under the tires. So that one I don't understand. Like, I mean, even if you had the Accusump inside the car, you'd still have oil under the car eventually anyways.
Well, you'd have flammable liquid all over the...
That's true. Yeah, so, and you'd have hot oil spraying all over the driver. Like, wherever you put it, it's a scenario where you just don't want oil. Like, I don't know. I would say maybe if they had a remote-mounted bin or something where you could, I guess, return it back into the oil pan. Yeah.
But it's not. It's like a little fitting that just sprays out.
Correct. So, I guess we kind of got stuck there for a little while. I think we kind of abandoned for a little while and went back to the drawing boards.
And we came back home dejected without a race car.
That was a long weekend, wasn't it? Yeah. So we kind of went back to the drawing boards. We touched base with the Accusump guys quite a bit, got their input on it. They were very helpful, I have to say. They were pretty good. And I guess we needed to do some testing. So we needed to figure out, I guess with any problem, you need to get some data and make sense of it rather than just try things and guess if you like.
Use data. Data is the key thing there.
Definitely.
Sensors and data.
Yes. So we eventually figured out, I guess by doing some very basic measuring, that we had nearly 200 psi of oil pressure at the oil cooler, even though we're only seeing 100 psi at the engine. So that was...
And this is the return, by the way. So this basically just goes back through the thermostat.
Yes.
And then straight to the engine.
Yeah.
So it doesn't go. It's not pre-oil cooler. So.
Correct. So we kind of obviously I guess we tested at multiple points. So we tested here. We tested at the block to make sure our sensors are reading correctly. We obviously already had sensor on the turbo feed. So we just wanted to see. I guess we wanted to make sense. Like if the valve is venting, then there has to be that much oil pressure. We just didn't know about it. We just didn't think that there would be that much pressure drop between here and the block. And we kind of attribute that to the thermostat, I believe. We think the thermostat is a bit of a bottleneck, and that's why there's such a large discrepancy, if you like.
Because we're essentially seeing 200 here, and then pre-filter we're seeing...
So pre-filter we're seeing like 110, and then post-filter we're seeing like 90. And look, I think between the pre-filter and post-filter, I think 20 psi drop is probably not huge. It's probably to be expected. I mean, considering still an OEM filter anyways. So I think that was okay. I guess our biggest issue is we just didn't see that we had that much oil pressure there in the first place. So I guess the next point became is where do we take oil from? So we kind of had a few options. We had the replate. We had, yeah, let's bring it down. So we had, I don't know how much you'll see, but we'll have a look anyway. We had the replate. We had the oil filter pedestal, which goes on the replate as well. We had the port on the front plate, which is commonly used for the turbo oil feed. We also had to think about whether we wanted to put filtered oil through the Accusump or non-filtered oil, because I believe the Accusumps are very sensitive. If you want to come have a look, I don't know, see if you can have a look. I'll see if I can get some light going. So you want to probably poke the camera down there, and you'll see where the factory oil filter goes. That's really lighting up very well. So see where that little logo is. There's an oil filter above it. You can kind of just get it there. So we could pick it up from there, or we could pick it up from the front oil plate, which I don't think you'll be able to see. It's just in front of the oil fill neck. There's a little port on the front plate that normally feeds the turbo.
I don't think you can see it with this.
Yeah, with this,
basically under here.
With the bunnies ducked on. But look, so we kind of had a few spots to decide where we're going to pull oil from. We kind of felt like the Accusump should have clean oil. I think that was one of the big things. The Accusump guys said that it should be filtered oil. It shouldn't be pre-filter. It should be post-filter. We also thought that would go in our favor because post-filter was less oil pressure as well. So at least we weren't anywhere near the valve maximum. So the valve maximum was 175, and we were measuring 90 to 95 psi as a max on the front plate. So we decided we'd take our oil from the front and we'd move the turbo oil feed to the replate. So we put a...
So previously the turbo was coming off this...
Yeah, so it was coming off the front plate. We put a full function engineering oil pedestal on, which gives you an extra port for oil. And we use that for the turbo. We had to put a filter on that line because on this pedestal, that port isn't filtered. So the turbo has its own separate oil filter now, which is
not using like a speed for like filter.
Yeah, which is not totally uncommon anyways. Lots of turbos tend to have their own filter anyways.
So essentially, we've got the return cable coming from the thermostat.
Yep. Which feeds the pedestal.
Yep. So that goes on the pedestal. Yep. Then we've got off one of the ports on the pedestal. We've got a sensor on one. Do we?
No. So we got a sensor on the replate which measures the pre-filter channel.
Yep. And then we've got a feed that comes off.
Yes.
Goes through a filter.
Yes. And then to the turbo. Yeah. And then we have the port on the front plate dedicated to the Accusump. Okay, and we also have a sensor on that port, so we get to see exactly what oil pressure is going to the Accusump. We don't have to kind of guess that anymore. So we know like there's no way that that's going to see huge amounts of oil pressure anymore. So, and obviously once we did that, we finally got an idle and a ref session without oil all over the ground. We didn't have to do any cleanups. Thank God. That was a nightmare. We're actually a little
linear curve now.
Yes, so that's the other thing. So looking at the data now, we don't have. So we used to have this dip coming onto boost, right? So the oil pressure would dip and then it would climb again, and then it would dip again. So we don't see any of that anymore. We see oil pressure, I guess, linearly rise and then plateau, and it
not having to share that oil.
There's nothing being shared to the turbo, exactly. So obviously before, what we were seeing is the turbo consuming oil as it's coming on boost, which, I mean, makes sense now, but at the time, you know, there's just so much going on. We don't know whether it's the engine doing that or whether it's the turbo. But, I mean, I guess that's the beauty of data, is we can deduce that now and we know that's what was happening. So,
and we stopped scratching our heads, because I think we spent a lot of time sort of assuming that the rear port was
yes.
for the rear rotor,
Yes.
and the front port was for
Correct.
the front rotor, and we were wondering why there's such a big
why there's such a difference.
It's like 15mm channel, yeah?
Yeah. It
and
is
we're
a
like,
big channel.
we can't be losing 20, 30, 40 psi sometimes.
Just throw
across
over the
that.
channel. Yeah.
And then we found out eventually that the rear port, where the stock filter, is actually pre-filter.
Yes.
So
yeah. So under the oil filter, there's two galleries. One goes down to the oil rig, and that's the channel where we're measuring oil pressure from. And then the other gallery, that goes to the rear gear and front gear and so on. So we were basically, without knowing, measuring pre-filter and post-filter.
And I know a lot of people put their sensors there, so
Yep.
it's probably a good thing for people to just keep in mind that when you're measuring there, you're actually measuring pre-filter, so that's not the pressure that you're with.
So if you have an oil filter failure or anything like that, you won't see it on that sensor. You'll assume that oil pressure is great, and you'll still damage your bearing because there's no oil pressure there. That's kind of why we've always measured at the front. We've had a couple of cars where we found much larger variances, and I guess now we know why that is the case. But we've seen some really large variances between measuring from the rear and the front. And we found the front to be the bottom line, if you like, for oil pressure. If the front has oil pressure, then you know the rest of the engine has oil pressure. And typically, whenever we strip these engines down, whether they're factory or modified, it's always the front gear bearing that's damaged. Like even when you had the pickup issue, when Rahul decided to jack his oil pan, it was only the front bearing that had a slight mark on it. It wasn't, none of the other bearings had any sort of damage on them. It was just the front one. It's always the one that seems to, be damaged. So yeah, it was a huge learning curve.
The other thing that was very interesting in support of the turbos, this is a Borg Warner EFR 9180. Now, when we were testing it, for some reason, I don't know whether you ever had any thoughts about this, but we were seeing spikes with the 20W60 and the pre-oiling of the Accusump. For some reason, we were seeing spikes of 300 psi.
Yes, on the initial startup.
Now, 300 psi was so much that it actually, twice, for two different oil filters, it blew out the side of the filter, the seal. And I remember leaning under the car here, trying to look under the car to see if the pressure relief valve was discharging. And I remember once I almost started the car and I felt something on my leg, and I look up, and no joke, the oil's literally coming out as like this gush of oil landing, and we were talking like a little spray. It was splattering on the ground. Out of the side of the oil filter. That's how much pressure it was running. And after all of that, the turbo did not leak once.
Yeah. The Borg Warners are amazing for that. I mean, we ran 200 psi at the track. There's no regulator on that turbo.
Not a drop of oil in here.
I don't think we even have a restrictor on that turbo.
No.
There's nothing.
No, just direct oil feed straight into the turbo.
And it's never smoked. It's never leaked. You're gonna jinx it now, but.
Compare that to my old turbo, which is a TO4S, and all my intakes were always filled with oil everywhere in the intake system.
No, the Borg Warner stuff is, especially the EFR line, is top of the line. We've never ever had any oiling issues ever with the EFR stuff. We never have to do anything special. They just work. So they are really good like that. So yeah, I guess once we got the Accusump done, and we were happy with that, we kind of thought, okay, we were ready to move on and get the car on the dyno and make sure it all works. I mean, it's been sitting for 13, 14 months, so we kind of had to make sure.
Moved in and out every day.
Well, we started it probably every day, but I mean,
how many tanks of fuel did we go through? Just
yes.
The car,
so I think I'll have to check. I reckon we've probably put somewhere between 200 and 250 litres of fuel in this car.
Just idling
yes.
and moving it in and out of the shop.
Yeah. So we basically start them, warm them up, move them out, switch them off. And we do that twice a day, obviously, in and out.
Plus the 76 litres that were already in there.
Yes. Yeah, they probably went in the first week.
85 bundle.
Yeah. So we've chewed through some fuel on this thing. But obviously we wanted to do a health check because the car's been sitting for so long. We'd obviously redone the whole oiling system. We were still a little on the fence with the Accusump. We wanted to make sure that it would survive, load and RPM, if you like. I guess we didn't know what to expect. You know, we'd gone through so much. You know, when you kind of go through that much challenge, if you like, you kind of think, I'm just going to take it slow and see how it goes. So we put it on the dyno. We didn't have any issues with the Accusump, which was brilliant. But we hit a wall with our secondary injectors. So every time we try and stage the car, so just for the guys who don't know, obviously rotaries have two stages of injection. We have a primary and a secondary. Obviously the primaries are working, otherwise the car wouldn't run. But every time we'd come on boost and it was time for those secondary injectors to start spraying, the engine would basically just shut off and it'd do a lean backfire. So whenever an engine is lean, it'll do a loud backfire.
And so just for reference, we're running ID1700X for the primaries,
yes.
and Bosch Motorsports 2200 for the...
Correct, yeah. So obviously those injectors didn't like sitting for a long period of time. They'd basically not opened in a year at least. So they weren't interested in reopening again, and we kind of figured we didn't want to put something back on that would probably do the same thing. And seeing as it is a race car, still a street car, or it's a registered race car, which means we'll never drive it on the street, obviously. But we kind of figured a car that sits for a long period of time, we don't want to take the risk of the injector sort of blocking up again. We kind of figured it would be time to put some injectors in there. And did I push you into the 2600s, or push you? I did. Yeah. I guess, look, I was pushing for more power. He pushed for less power, but we're going to get more power in a later race. we're gonna break the gearboxes. Time will come, but we're planning for the future. So we ended up putting ID2600s in it, and yeah, they were really good. They were really good. We ended up putting them in, and obviously we did the waste head springs, so we couldn't really get to see if the car would make more power. But we have, I think, at least another 10% of injector duty available now compared to what we had before. So I think,
and Haltech's got the new firmware upgrade.
Yes, yeah. So they got the new injector staging. So that's really nice. We're no longer dealing with one singular point, if you like. So you get a table and altitude. So that's really good. That actually troubled us a lot. I think we finally got to a working solution. It still wasn't perfect, especially on the transient throttle. Whenever the injectors would stage on the transient throttle, we still had, you know, lean and rich spots and whatnot. So
I think a lot of the things that used to annoy me about the Haltech, like the shortcomings and all that, seem to have been fixed in the latest version.
Yeah. I guess in the car's hibernation, there's been lots of firmware upgrades. I think the fuel pressure protection actually works now.
That was the worst thing. That was the most annoying thing. The amount of limp modes, and then you basically end up just turning it off.
You would actually have it off, otherwise it wouldn't work properly. So that actually works now. I've tried it on a few cars that finally does work properly. So I think they've noted down a lot of stuff. It's really good. So what else is there? So we did injectors, we did the Accusump, we did gearbox,
the exhaust.
Yes. Oh well, yeah. So. You know what? I think I should let you explain the exhaust, because the exhaust was your request. I mean, I just prefer it for loud.
Well, as you guys probably know, I've got this thing in the car here, which is the R1 Titan, which is my best sounding exhaust, I reckon, for the FD. You can see it in there. And let's just say when it's got a straight mid pipe on there, it is the loudest thing in the world at idle. At idle, even at World Time Attack, in front of all these pro class cars and all that, this thing was louder than a lot of them. Yeah. Except when it was on track, it actually gets pretty quiet. So it's only loud at idle.
That was really interesting.
Yeah, on track it's like silent.
I wonder if that's because it exits the reed. If it was like a side
exhaust,
like that, I think it would be much louder.
Yeah, good point. But yeah, it was extremely loud, and then we put in an SMB mid muffler, and it kind of made it a bit less ridiculous, but it was still ridiculous. Like, there's no way, like, occasionally I have to drive the car to, you know, like dyno or to Raceline or something like that for a wheel alignment, and it was just like the most terrifying thing of my life, because just driving there and just like, oh my god, this car is so ridiculous. So eventually what we ended up doing was actually I ended up asking Omar, look Omar, I need something that I can drive around the street. Also, like, you know, my neighbors have a new baby and all that kind of stuff, so I don't want to annoy them too much. So we're still keeping the R1 Titan for racetrack, but I just wanted something if I did need to move it around or just you know, do any work in the garage or whatever, that wasn't going to deafen everyone in the area. So Marlo put together this muffler, which looks kind of comically small in comparison to the other one.
It's tiny. I think it's 2.5 inch, so it's an AES 2.5 inch muffler. Oh yeah, I'll lift it up too. Actually, you've got to lift it up on the other side. I'll swing past him here and we'll do a little lift.
So you guys swear by the AES mufflers, don't
Look,
you?
I think they're the quietest you'll find on a radio. I think we've found anything quiet.
But also not particularly restrictive, yeah?
So, usually pretty good, actually.
Even though this is a little 2.5 inch. So I'm not, because this is just for moving around, it's not like I'm going to be bracing at a 21 psi. But it should be fine. Maybe we'll run a little bit richer. But you can sort of see here the transition from, this is the size, what is it, 3.5 or 3 inch?
It should be 3.5.
Yeah.
Yes,
And down
it's quite a
2.5.
transition.
Yeah. But it'll make the car a bit less terrifying to, you know,
It's
take
actually,
it to
I
the
think
dyno
it's-
and back.
I think it's probably a good 6 or 7, maybe even 6, maybe 8 decibels quieter. It's substantially quieter than the titanium special.
With the SMB.
It's-
As I'm assuming without the SMB, then it's like probably.
You know what? Look, it probably just it probably get a little louder without the SMB. I think you need both the mufflers in there to get the full effect. But look, it's. I mean, you guys heard it obviously already. It's nice and quiet. I think that's like this will be perfect for the street. Obviously, you have to do something about all the aero. For the street. Might be a little aggressive.
Just a little bit.
Has Anthony cut off anything really important for Redoit? You sure? Didn't you cut off the number plate bracket?
No, that was me. This thing. Just to get a little bit more, so I'm gonna have to.
Yeah.
A little bracket.
You have to do some sort of campus high special for the number plate. Yeah.
Look, when you're at the track and you're like, I just need to reduce the intercooler by 1 degree. It's like at the time everything seems like a good idea, and then you come back and you're like, oh, maybe it was a bit.
I think the air temps were okay at what time of that one day.
Oh, these temps were.
Oh, the water temps were excellent.
But the intercooler was
the
getting
intercooler still a bit warm?
Yeah.
I guess, I mean, at the height boost there is, I mean, it's going to...
Also, it's because we have that bypass stuff now, so it's got this duct here that then directly feeds into the radiator. The bottom half and the top half is basically intercooler, but it's only half of it, so there's more resistance. So obviously that completely fixed our overheating issue. If you recall World Time Attack 2018, one lap and I'd hit 115 degrees with exactly the same radiator, exactly the same intercooler setup, and just this dodgy duct that we made out of a combination of fiberglass, aluminium, and steel, out of little bits and pieces of junk in the garage. We were able to actually bring it down now where we barely, even after consecutive hot laps, not hitting over 90. But it did raise the intercooler temps, degrees, so towards that. But, yeah. But apart from that, I guess, hopefully the car's like going well now. So I'm trying to aim to get to a track day. I think there's a Winton track day at the end of December and a Sandown track day as well. So I'm hoping to get the car ready for that. So I'll load up on the trailer, take it back to Melbourne, do a few bits and pieces just to prep it, and then, yeah, hopefully get at least 2 track days in 2020, rather than having a completely 7-day-less 2020, but, yeah.
When didn't we plan a track day in February for this car?
Yes, we were trying to do a track day up in Wakefield.
I remember that.
And then, yeah, that was around the same time the COVID sort of
Yeah,
hit.
that's right. COVID cost us a couple of months as well, so
Yeah.
that was
So I think goodbye to my relaxed weekend. Back to work.
back to stressful weekend.
All right, stay tuned.
Awesome.